And if I look through the recession, who did particularly well? Well, McDonald's. I mean, they're just, love them or hate them, they're just sort of brilliant at quick service restaurants. Here they are with their saver menu, 99 pence in the UK, but it's 99-cent hamburgers in Canada and the US. I mean, how can you do that? How can you do that? But also, they recognize McDonald's straight away that there's the other side of the market that is growing, which is the premium end. And here they are with the Grand Angus burger. Actually, this is taken from Australia, but I'm sure they're doing exactly the same in Canada and North America. So that premium end's growing and the value end's growing. It's sort of intriguing. And so if we take an area you're interested in, I mean, I would suggest, for example, that even recovering from recession, even where retailers are pressing down on value, that where you're seeing growth is, for example, premium products like aged beef, so dry aged beef. So in an era where we think it's all about lower price, it depends. There's excellent growth in that area. So what do you think? I mean, remember, we've seen this sort of volatile food prices over the last 5, 6 years, and here we are at historically high levels right now. What do you think is going to happen over the next 5 years? Up? Food prices up? I don't know, but whatever the answer is, will be fundamental to your businesses, I can assure you. And I don't know what the answer is. I wouldn't be standing here yakking if I did. I'd have taken positions in markets and I would be sitting, as Charlie suggested, on a beach somewhere throwing rocks at pigeons. So, but what I do know is, it could be any of the above. So this sort of inflationary period that we're in at the moment and that we've been through over the last 5 years, is it just a blip? And actually, as a recession just fades away nicely, it's business as usual by 2012, where actually we're going to go back to an era where prices were stable and relatively low. So do you think that's going to happen? Or do you think actually it's more complex than that? Increasing volatility in raw material supply, that we're going to see corn prices racing up, driven perhaps by oil price spikes, that it's going to be mayhem out there, and it's going to be all about risk management, not least for livestock feeders. When do I buy the feed? When do I sell the end result? Is that going to be, so that's position two. Or are we into a new era with the focus shifting back to national food security, where consumers start to cherish more local, much greater emphasis on climate change, green issues go mainstream, and we recognize as we keep on adding people that we're going to need more and more food, and we're going to have to use every tool in the box to get that food. So that includes high-tech use, which is sort of code for GM, so using GMO to just drive food supply, or better traditional practices. So that's my third position. Or is the fourth position, we're buggered. We're going to add 2 billion people over the next 40 years. We're not going to be able to cope. Malthus was spot on. Let's enjoy ourselves while we can, because in 50 years' time, we're going to just run out of stuff. We haven't got enough resources. So, I'm saying that's, you've got 1, 2, 3. Which is the most likely? What would you think? I don't think it's 1. I don't think we're going to go back to stable, low prices. And I don't think we're buggered. I know we're in for volatility over the next 2, 3 years, and I rather think it's a new era with this focus shifting to food security. I can see it around the world. The guy talking about trade policy will be able to make a comment on it, where in Europe we're starting to talk about we need to be more secure in our food supplies. That's sort of code for let's get production up at home, and we have to stop that nasty stuff coming in from overseas. I mean, I would think trade liberalization has got a real tough road to hoe over the next 3, 5, 7 years. I don't know, but I know from a business perspective, you've got to have a view on that and say, what would happen if? So, but look, I'm not down on the food industry, and from a meat industry point of view, there's reason to be really, really positive. But this I find intriguing. If I look at world population growth over the next 40 years, we've roughly got 7 billion people now, and in another 20 years, we're going to add another billion. And in another 20 years, we'll add another billion. So we're likely going to end up about 9 billion by 2050. That's not that far away. But the interesting thing, where are those folk? And actually what it comes down to, we're going to add 1 billion to Asia and 1 billion to Africa. And everywhere else is going to be roughly stable. Roughly. In Europe, for example, some countries will edge up, but a lot will lose population. Let's take Japan. Population of Japan. Anybody like to make a guess? What is it now? It's 130 million now in 2011. By 2000 and, let's just add on 10 years, by 2022, they'll lose 10 to 12 million people. It will be less than 120 million. Is that a great environment to be if you're in the food industry? You're going to lose 12 million customers. There's little Japan can do in the short term, apart from open the doors and let in immigrants. How likely is that going to be? That Japan will radically change its immigration policy? Looking at you. Never in 100 years. They're going to lose 10, 12 million people. So if I look in just macro stuff, I'm saying you've got another billion coming in 20 years and another billion, and half are going to be in Africa and half are going to be Asia. The issue is going to be the African billion, will they be able to afford it? And in the Asian billion, what exactly will they want? And that's what I'll talk about just very briefly now. Because if you take developed countries, this is the demographic profile. And of course, what it shows, as we know, it's the same in Canada as it is in the UK, as it is in the US, that it's like a column. That roughly we've got the same number of oldies as we have young folk. And if you add up the, let's just take the under 10-year-olds in total developed countries, then we get to a figure which is about 200 million under 10-year-olds in all developed countries at the moment. What do you think the picture looks like for emerging countries, for developing countries? What would be the shape? What would be its shape? A little teeny bit pyramidal? Yeah. With audiences, what I suggest here is there's a trend here. You might be able to spot it. I find it easier if you just sort of narrow your eyes because it gives you better focus when you see it, because you might be able to see the change here. Okay? That's it. And if we take that same under 10, remember there were 200 million under 10 aspiring consumers in developed countries. It's 1.2 billion in emerging countries. In 10, 15 years' time, that's the new household. That's the consumer of tomorrow. You know, terrific opportunity. And what about from a meat point of view? What we do know, you know, there's no magic here, that meat demand is driven by two things: increasing income and increasing population. Bingo. So you guys can just sort of relax, and you're going to have a really good time over the next 40 or 50 years, and I wish you well, and I hope you enjoyed the talk. Of course, it's not quite that simple. Not quite that simple. So here we go. What does it say here? More people, more burgers, with population booming, and 3 billion, they're saying here, worldwide, trying to enter the middle class. The demand for meat is skyrocketing, and it will continue to skyrocket. It will continue. And do folk in emerging markets like meat? Well, yes, they do. Do they want to eat more? Yes, as income goes up. Here, this is a shot. Again, it's Walmart. There was a pork special. Where was I? I was in Hangzhou City in a Walmart. And, you know, talk about a rugby scrum. It was wild. Did they want more pork? They wanted more pork. But they're completely different, of course. If you look at those Asian markets, totally different. In Canada, in the US, in the UK, in Australia, in many of the countries that I work, we're so meat-centric when it comes to meals. I mean, in the UK, I'm not sure if it works for Canada, but let's try it. If I say, what do you fancy for Sunday lunch?
Roast beef or a steak?
A roast beef or a steak, yeah. Or, you know, if we're out in London, what do you fancy for a meal? It'll be sort of, let's have a steak. We're very meat-centric, where we start with the meat, and then we add stuff around the side of the plate, and that's it. Now, is that how they work in China or, in Vietnam or what have you? Well, not really. No. I'll come back to that. Apart from anything else, what type of meat do they eat? If I look at global consumption of the major meats, what have we got here? So the blue bit is fish. So dark blue is wild fish, and light blue is aquaculture. And what are we seeing over this 20-year period that I've taken here is, first of all, close to 40% of all meat protein consumed in the globe is fish, and the big switch is from wild-caught to farmed. What's the number 2 meat? Well, it's all about pork. Number 3 meat, poultry. And then you've got this relatively thin strip, the red one, which is, the classic red meats, which would be beef in your context, but in other countries it might include lamb, for example. And, this is the green bit right at the top. So what do we see? Overall, across the globe, meat consumption overall will grow. That beef will lose market share, global market share, but that doesn't necessarily mean there'll be less beef sold because population is increasing at such a rate. But it is a minority meat in world terms. In world terms. And when I'm in China, as I often am, and here I am having a meal with my translator's mum and dad, are they meat-centric? No, you have Sunday, this was Sunday lunch with the family. They'd made a special effort because, around I had come from outside. What did we have? We had about 10 different dishes. There was some chicken, there was some fish, there was some pork, there was stuff that I couldn't make out what it was. At the top there, we've got their fish balls, as they say, best part of the fish. And it's a real mixture. It's a real mixture. I mean, that's why it's a real challenge anywhere in the world for one person to go out for a Chinese meal. How can you have 10 dishes when there's one of you? So that's pretty typical. That's the big meal. And what are the kitchens like? I mean, it's really, to get under the skin of the consumer, you've got to see, how do they cook it, for example. And this would be any kitchen in Shanghai, in any apartment in Shanghai. It's about this size. That's the kitchen. Where's the cooking done? On top of the stove. What's the most likely way for it to be cooked? Steamed, boiled, or just sort of flash fried, if you will. And I was just, the other day, I still wear a little bit of an academic hat. I was examining a PhD that had been done by a Malaysian woman for an Australian university. And her research had been looking at shopping behavior for fresh foods in Malaysia. And it was sort of really revealing for me. And so I pinched some of her results. And here we are, main ways of cooking beef, Malaysian middle-class families, 2010. And you see it there, 2/3 stir-fried with sauce, soup, red or green, this is for beef, red or green curry, yes, there's some roasted, boiled with soy sauce or rendang, festive spicy stew. I mean, what did I get out of that? If I was a Malaysian shopper, I'd be less concerned than, say, a Canadian shopper about whether the beef came from the front end or the back end of the beast. I mean, I wouldn't be awarding a huge premium, I don't think, for the rear end. In many cases, what is preferred is the fat anyway. Or let's going on here, what were the major factors influence in Malaysian shoppers' decision to purchase beef? It was really classic, this for me. Right at the top, and this was for Malays, it was for Muslim Malays, not Chinese Malays in particular. Right at the top was this worry that they had about the halal process. And there was her survey showed there was a widespread view that supermarkets, which had got the halal stamp on, were not necessarily buying halal meat.